Computer. Okay, welcome everybody to an evening of discussion, a question and answers based on book Letters of Life, which is guidance for emotional wellness from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's a fascinating topic. We have the author of the book here, Rabbi Levi Shmotkin, who has done a remarkable. I read the book cover to cover and couldn't put it down once I started reading it. I think he did a remarkable job. And we'll let him speak for himself. But first, we're going to do this as a discussion between ourselves, myself and Levi, and then we'll also open up, of course, to questions and answers. So I'd just like to throw out an opening question. And what in the world motivated you, young man, who I assume has not gone through, grew up in the United States, didn't live through wars, didn't run to bomb shelters. To the kids that are growing up today in Israel, maybe we'll be able to tell about the bomb shelters they're running to, but grew up in Connecticut, United States. What would have motivated you to dedicate, I would imagine, several years of your life to writing a book about emotional wellness?
Okay, so first of all, hi everyone. It's an honor to be here in Thailand. But as you said, you're a close family friend for many years. So to actually be here in the Chabad house in Thailand, very special. I was over the last few months, I had the honor of being in different communities around the world. But yesterday, as I walk into the house and I was speaking to the Rebbe, and she's telling me that she's spent the day in the hospital, someone bitten by a snake, and really fighting for their life. And she was there, an Israeli tourist, sitting at their side and being there as a support. Just something entirely different from what you see, even in Chabad House, with all the work that they do. So it's very special to be here. Thank you for having me. And to your question about how I got to writing this book. So, as you said, I was an ordinary young person with good parents, good educator, good education, good educators, good friends, and there didn't seem to be any particular reason for emotional turbulence or emotional struggle. And nevertheless, as I'm growing up and my own mind and heart are emerging, I start sensing an inner world that's gnawing at me. And for the first time, it was very surprising to me. I start feeling negative thoughts about myself, negative feelings that are heavier on me. And I think when there's a particular catalyst for the emotional ups and downs, in a way, it's harder because there's a specific challenge, but in a way, it's easier because you know what it is. If, for example, if you lose a loved one, there's breakup, if there's a loss of career, in all those cases, you kind of know what it is that you're trying to address. You know what's the reason for the pain, and you can do a more particular therapy or healing of that. However, when there isn't anything in the framework of your life that you can point to as the reason for the emotional struggle, I think in a way it's more confusing. And it also forces you to address not something particular, but the essence of the human experience. So there I was in yeshiva, and I'm feeling this inner world that's emerging, that's taking a lot of my brain space. And I understood that I need something to address it that would, cut through the noise and really talk to the essence of the mind and the heart as I was now experiencing it. And that's when I found myself drawn to the extensive body of literature, which is the Rebbe's correspondence. And to date, we have over 20,000 letters accessible. And that's only the tip of the iceberg of so many more. 13,000 in Hebrew and Yiddish, another 7,000 about in English. And I found myself gravitating towards this body of literature. I'm reading one letter and another letter, another letter. And the words slowly, sometimes you read a book and you're looking at the book, but the words start coming off the page and becoming alive to you. And that's what I felt. I'm reading a letter to someone else, but a lot of them, they just started coming off the page and becoming like addressing me because they were mirroring the insecurities, the fears, the angst that I was having. And I'm watching the Rebbe take 3,000 years of Jewish wisdom, 3,000 years of Torah, and bringing it down to the feelings that I was having and they were having. I started reading more and more. I think other areas of my study suffered, but I was just binge reading these letters. And slowly I started seeing patterns, recurring ideas that the Rebbe clearly sees as pillars of building emotional health in a very unsettling world. And I started taking down notes for myself. I never thought about writing a book. So here's one idea that the Rebbe sees as critical.
I'm going to interrupt you because we're doing a Zoom. I think face that way.
Face this way. Not
Come
you?
more center. No.
You guys see me?
Yeah, everyone sees.
Okay.
They see you. Sorry, I cut you off.
Some of these tools were, so I'm looking this way?
Yeah.
Okay. You're the people, that's it. Forget everyone else. So some of these ideas are, Yeah.
Amazing.
So some of the ideas are more cognitive, perspective changes. Some of them are mental, like exercises about how to respond to thoughts and feelings that are negative that you don't want. Some of them are very behavioral. A lot of the Rebbe's counseling is actionable. It's about change in your daily habits. So over the course of a few months, I'm starting to implement these tools that I'm finding in the Rebbe's letters. And slowly, no emotional change happens in a day. But slowly, I start sensing an entirely new energy that's lifting me up from the darker place that I was in and opening me up to a new way of seeing life, a new way of seeing the world. And I had a very strong sense of gratitude to the Rebbe's wisdom that allowed me to break out of this darker place and ultimately find tools, perspectives, and exercises and reflections that allowed me a different type of health and joy than I'd ever experienced before. And that's when the seed of putting together this book came about. I did not realize what that entails. I thought 3-4 months. Meanwhile, 3-4 years later, I'm still trying to bring it about. But Baruch Hashem, thank God, after 5 years, Letters for Life emerged a few months ago, and here we are. So that's the long, short answer.
You're the center guy.
To your question.
Okay, so I want to, as a rabbi for, a couple of decades, somebody who hears people, studies people, enjoys being with people. Obviously, I come, into the world of people that have moods and ups and downs. I think our generation, what I want to ask is those letters that the Rebbe wrote to people, were they uniquely written to the new, I would say, emotional wellness crisis that I believe is really started to emerge as life became more comfortable, less grind. People had more time. They have more time to think, are they happy? Are they not happy? Am I feeling fulfilled, not feeling fulfilled? Let's say before the war and the shtetl and even the United States, right after the Depression, they didn't have time to think about whether they're happy or not. Rabbi Twersky says he thinks the reason alav shalom, the reason that there's huge mental health crisis is because it's part of the blessing of our times that we have such freedom. So what's unique in the story you're telling, and I think unique in the letters you're presenting, is that they're not prescribing medication, because I would assume for that you have to go to a doctor. They're not speaking to people that necessarily went through major trauma. I'm not speaking to, God forbid, people that were molested. They seem to be speaking to people that are going through difficult times, but have had pretty normal, pretty standard lives, but yet they're not coping, which is the story you're describing. Totally, I know your parents well. I know the environment you grew up in. There's no trauma. Yet today, everybody seems to have something traumatic in their life. Call it trauma, don't call it trauma. And there's much to be said about the need for a book like this. I think it's the way it's being lapped up around the world tells you. And my question is, why is this different than, let's say, reading a book by Viktor Frankl? logotherapy, or a book by who else writes? Today there's a lot of self-help books. What's unique about that you discovered about this book that makes this book compelling to be out there in the bookshelf and out there, particularly in the Jewish world? And I think you have a story you just told me. Maybe you share it, even in the non-Jewish world. Yeah, start with the story because I loved it. I don't want to tell your story.
From Mariah?
From Mariah, yeah.
Well, there's a lot I have to respond to in that question.
Okay,
We'll try piece by piece. So we'll end with the Mariah.
Practice this in advance. So I hope I not put you on the spot.
No. That's the energy. It's like live television.
You're going to give a big speech. Do you want to stand up?
No, you guys can hear me? Yeah. So just 2 days ago on Tuesday, I was in Mariah College, which is the biggest Jewish high school in the Western Hemisphere, to give a talk to their students.
Sydney, Australia.
Sydney, yes. And I'm coming through the gate. It's like a gated high school. And the security guard happens to also be a pastor. And the person who was waiting for me from the college to allow me in explained to the security guard that he's bringing an author in. So I asked him, "Oh, what book?" He says, "Letters for Life." He says, "Oh, I was just counseling a couple, non-Jewish. He's not Jewish, and the couple wasn't Jewish. And they were telling me how important it is for me as a pastor to read this book that they're loving, which is Letters for Life." So that was very interesting to
in Australia,
to be in Australia and bump into the security guard who knows Letters for Life. And there's been very special stories of different writers, and politicians, and community leaders that have been reading Letters for Life in very special ways, because I think the ideas are universal. Well, back to your question. What makes this book different, right? That was the question. I would say a few things. First of all, there is a very, very strong faith that pervades every word of the Rebbe's counseling. And I think it's in a way that's quite different from what's prevalent today and what you'll find in other sources. And a lot of what the literature today and the prevalent notions are very pervaded by sympathy, I think. And for good reason. We have a lot of sympathy for people's struggle, a lot of validation. But I think some of it masks a certain hopelessness, that we don't really believe the person we're talking to or addressing actually has the ability to overcome their struggle. And in the Rebbe's letters, I think because the Rebbe is coming off Torah, real belief in Hashem, in God, and real belief also in the human being created in his image, the human being with a soul that connected to God, that trust and that faith comes through in every line of what he's writing to someone. He's not just patting them on the back, he's also challenging them with their strength, that they're able to rise up, like a rising lion, we're thinking about a lot today, rise from the ashes of wherever their life has taken them and really move to somewhere else entirely. And you have this letter after letter after letter.
Can you give an example?
So should I give a more elaborate example, or we...
You guys want an elaborate example? Yeah.
An elaborate example. So I'll actually share a personal experience. I was in Los Angeles on the book tour a few months ago, and I was invited to speak at a recovery center in LA. And it was a very daunting task to speak to a group of people that have gone through much more than I have. And the extremes of the human experience, consumed by, numbing their pain with substances. And on the other hand, also had the courage to change course and admit themselves into a facility to find a different path in life. So what am I going to say that would address the moment and address them in a way that would be authentic? They also are very easy in sensing right away if you're just preaching or you're saying something from your soul, from your neshama. So it was a very daunting task. I was actually, flustered by it. I was thinking about, what am I going to say? And I decided to share a letter that I found personally meaningful because it doesn't talk to something as extreme as addiction, but to a particular type of pain that I haven't really seen addressed so much in other books, for sure, holy books. And that's why I remember when I read this letter, and I thought I would communicate that because even though it's not what they're going through, it's something that I can say from my heart to them, and then hopefully they'll take the bigger message in their own way. And it's a letter from 1951. And it addresses the change that happens every year from winter to spring. Is there winter in Thailand? Not really. Okay. Okay. Well, there are some places in the world there's something called winter, and when that happens, the trees, the leaves fall off and the fruits fall off, and the trees just are bare bones branches. And that goes on for several months, for many long months. And then after however many months, spring comes, and within a week or two, the leaves come back and the fruits come back and the smell of revival is everywhere. So the Rebbe, and one of the axioms of Jewish mysticism is that every phenomenon in nature, everything that happens in the natural world, is there to communicate a lesson to us in our own life. The galaxies, the sun, the moon, even the black hole you have in the book is there to teach us something about the way we live and the way we can go about life in a better way. So the Rebbe hones in on this and he says, why? Right? Why did Hashem create the change of seasons in such a way that we have winter for so long? And winter, nothing happens. It's not that there's a forest fire that burns down all the trees, there's a tsunami or something like that. No, everything stays in place. Everything stays put. And just the leaves peter out and it just becomes this like empty shell, skeleton of a being. And then and Hashem doesn't make that just happen for a week. It happens for a month and 2 months and 3 months and 4 months and 5 months. And then after that extended period, there's spring and it comes back booming. What's the lesson here? What's Hashem trying to communicate to us with that metamorphosis from winter to spring? And I'll read a little bit of the letter here that the Rebbe explains because I found it very moving. Applying this idea to the human element, there can be a state of winter, of apparent unproductivity in the life of a person. So the Rebbe is interpreting what's winter. Winter, and this is already, actually when I was speaking to them is when it's not night, it's not a major darkness, not a major fire. It's just you lose the rhythm. It's apparent unproductivity. You lose the fruits, you lose the spark, you lose the momentum, and you just become this bare bone trees. And there can be a state of winter in the life of a person, and there isn't any big problem, right? There's no breakup, there's no loss. Just you lose the rhythm. You lose the place you were going. And that can go on for an extended period. But what Hashem is trying to communicate with us by having winter for so long, is he's saying no matter how long that goes on, it can be 5 weeks, 5 months, or 5 years. Sometimes this feeling can go on for so long. And you could identify as winter. You start believing that you are a bare bones tree and there is nothing more to your life. So the Rebbe continues, says, but no individual should consider themselves and certainly should not be considered by others as having terminated their usefulness, even though a long time of fruitlessness has elapsed. I'll read that phrase again. No individual should consider themselves and certainly should not be considered by others as having terminated their usefulness. Shouldn't say, oh, that's it. I'm maxed out. I'm never going to recapture the energy that I had. I'm never going to recapture the momentum that I had. You peter out, you spend more time on your phone, more time in bed, and you become this bare bones tree. And the longer that goes on, the more you assume that that's who you are. So no matter, even though a long time of fruitlessness has elapsed, given the proper inspiration and stimulus, the state of winter can easily and suddenly be changed into spring and blossom time, which eventually will ripen into good fruits for God and man. That's the letter. And to me, what the Rebbe is saying here is that why did Hashem create winter for so long? To tell us, to teach us that even though the state of winter, where you lose the momentum and you become this bare bones thing, goes on for so long, never assume that that's who you are. There's easily and suddenly, if you realize the infinite power you have inside yourself, you can change. And the green leaves, it doesn't take another year for the leaves to come back. No, if you throw yourself into it with the confidence, with the ability, and with the help of someone or higher wisdom, you can bounce back. So there I was in Los Angeles, and I started to share with them, I said, I remember this letter was a letter that spoke to me about renewal, because this problem of the type of piercing despair and pain that comes not from a particular problem, not from a forest fire, from winter, where you lose the momentum and you end up finding yourself in bed for more hours and just wasting your time and feeling a shadow of yourself. But again, there's essentially no problem. You have no one to turn to. You don't even think there's a problem. You don't understand it. They don't understand it. But there's a lot of pain. And this letter emerged and told me, no, that's why Hashem made winter for so long, to teach you that. So that's what I shared in the first half of the talk. In the second half of the talk, I shared a different story, which actually also connects this idea, where the Rebbe challenges someone who was actually suffered from addiction in a certain way to realize that they're bigger than their addiction. It's a longer story. It's in the book. And from the first half of the talk, I went to that story. Now, I thought that between the two parts of the talk, the second half would be more resonant and more relevant to the group of people I'm speaking to, because it talks to the experience that they're having. After the talk, it was a circle, a beautiful circle in a big room. We had 40, 50 people. So the facilitator went through the room and people were able to share their own reflections or thoughts. And person after person said that what they connected with was actually the first half of the talk. And the reason, they said, is that what got them on substances, what got them to feel so down and frustrated and despaired to the point that they felt they need to numb the pain with these stimulants. They said wasn't anything big that happened. It wasn't a loss. It wasn't a breakup. That wasn't it. Said it was actually this particular thing. They felt like somehow they lost their spark. They lost their momentum. They lost where they were going. And it became a vicious cycle. And they started telling themselves that that's it. That is the dead end of their life. They're stuck. There's nowhere to go from here. And their only escape was the substances that they had. And if they only would have understood this idea that the Rebbe communicates in this letter, and not only in this letter, in so many letters, the infinite ability that we have to, and the importance to check the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, and to know that we're much bigger than the present. No matter what it is, we're much bigger than it. Don't define yourself by your past. Don't define yourself by your present. You may be somewhere, but it's only somewhere where you happen to be right now. You can break out to something so much bigger, given the right help and with the right confidence in yourself. And if they would have only known that, then they wouldn't have resorted to such places like substances. So the takeaway is how important it is to check the story we tell ourselves about ourselves and to understand the infinite ability we have that the Rebbe draws from the Torah to overcome just about anything. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's one thing I think that distinguishes the Rebbe's letters and counseling from others is the confidence, faith, and challenge that it gives to us instead of just or beginning with a softer tone. Some people struggle with that, and I understand that, and I also maybe sometimes struggle with it too, but I think underlying it is a unshakable faith that changes everything. So that's one thing. I would say many other things, but I'll leave it with that.
Any comments from I wanna jump to something very, very practical. I want to jump to something very practical because right now we are in the time, you spoke about Rising Lion, we are in a time when this morning very dangerous missiles fell in Israel. And we have kids and grandkids that are sending us pictures from the missiles that are falling, running to the rooms. I want to know how is there something in the book that speaks to the feelings of anxiety, fear, and that right now people are feeling. You can't take away the threat. The threat is real. The threat is there. There's a reality. What would the Rebbe's advice be to people in that kind of a scenario? Or is it a chapter you still have to write?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I did not really deal with the anxiety of wars. Although, yes, considering the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, it would probably deserve a chapter and a separate exploration. So I can't really answer that from a place of complete research and study. However, there's the element of bitachon, of trust in Hashem, but I think also what you see in the Rebbe's talks and communication around Eretz Yisrael and its wars is the importance of morale, and the importance of optimism. And that's something, by the way, you see in so many areas, also in physical health struggles, how important morale and psychological strength is, not only because it makes us feel better as we go through a war or feel better as we go through an illness, but actually because it has direct impact on our physical body's ability to overcome illness. For example, the Rebbe points to study after study, we see the placebo effect, which means that because someone believes that the sugar pill that they took actually is a medicine, and their optimism goes up about their ability to heal, study after study shows that a decent percentage of them actually heal. And the only difference that changed is their level of optimism and their ability to heal. And the Rebbe again and again that how important it is for the patient to stay with the fighting spirit and to stay with optimism that they can and will overcome their illness. That comes together with the trust in Hashem, but the importance of the morale. And the same thing the Rebbe says that when fighting, that especially today, we see that the morale and the spirit of the army is so much more important than the quantity or the military might in the particulars of the machinery. Because today, I remember watching a talk where the Rebbe says, we all know that wars are won by the quality and not by the quantity.
Today.
Nuclear, morale, these are the things that determine wars much more. It used to be a numbers game, basically. Whoever has more soldiers to fight it out, 1-for-1, you win. But today, more and more, it's clear that that's not the deciding factor. And that's why spiritual health of the nation and the individuals doing a mitzvah, trust in Hashem, and the optimism that we can and will overcome our enemies is not only important for us to make it easier for us to go through this difficult period, but also because it directly impacts the actual outcome of the war. So I would say that the Rebbe would say to double down on your inner work to remain not only hopeful, but confident in our ability to overcome our enemies through trust in Hashem and trust in the strength of the Jewish people that are connected through Torah and mitzvahs, and to do another mitzvah to reconnect to that endless and infinite source of strength that we have. So I think there'll be a few points connected to this that I actually see direct parallels between our fight with our physical body, our fight as a nation, and our fight with the inner world in psychological health. Rebbe sees them all in one broader perspective. And I'll actually share something else in a minute, but I'll pass on the mic.
Go ahead. To me, the way the world looks through the Rebbe's lenses is that because we believe in Hashem, and every day we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, which means Hashem is one, which means the physical dimension of life, the spiritual dimension of life, the emotional dimension of life, the mental dimension of life, they're all part of the creation of Hashem. And therefore, it makes perfect sense. Just like if you take a physical medicine, it'll fight bacteria and it will activate things. The spiritual things we're doing, the mitzvahs, the mezuzah on our door, the tefillin, these are part of the sphere of the spirituality, which is directly integrated because there's a holistic world. Physical and spiritual are all part of God's one world, just different layers of that same reality. So sometimes we can hone in on the spiritual reality, and that will have its effect to undo the stuckness or the dysfunction that's expressing itself in the physical reality. For example, today there's very popular studies being done about muscle pain, about back pain, about neck pain, saying that really it's the body's mechanism to what addiction does to people by choice, to numb them, to get them distracted. The body has a mechanism to get the person away from his anxiety, away from his stress, and create a real pain somewhere, which is based on, you can check it out in MRIs, and you may find trouble. But there are some people that have that trouble in their disc or whatever it is, and they don't have the pain. And some people have that trouble, and that pain doesn't let them live. They need to be on medication. So it's very common today to understand that there's a linkage between what's going on in the mind and the physical feeling that a person may have, nerve endings and stuff like that. So you don't have to go very far, just to drop further to say that in the spiritual plane, which is just one step, one onion peel further outside this intimately interwoven reality. But if you fix your spirituality, a problem in your spirituality may also come down to become a dysfunction in your physicality, in your material. And the same thing will be, therefore, when the Rebbe comes in his guidance, to me, what differs so much than, a Viktor Frankl, the Rebbe was a fan of Viktor Frankl's approach, logotherapy. Famously, the Rebbe pushed him away from the brink of giving up and of despair that Vienna didn't accept his teachings. The Rebbe told him, keep on, you're almost there. And right after that, he got that message from the Rebbe, and he didn't run away to Australia. His teachings became extremely popular, his translated in every language and so on. But the Rebbe wasn't starting from the same place Viktor Frankl was starting in terms of studying the brain. The Rebbe was studying the soul of the world, the Torah, the blueprint of the world, and all of these ideas in Torah, which many people would be scared to actually say, if you do what it says in the Torah, you'll actually be strong, you'll be physically healthy, you'll be mentally healthy, because come on, we do what we roll our eyes. When you go to somebody, you tell him something hurts, and he tells you, I think you should check your mezuzah. Most of us, if we're not used to it, our generation is used to it because the Rebbe taught it to us. You could usually assume people will roll their eyes. Like, come on, I said I have a problem with an issue in the world. What are you sending me to the mezuzahs? But the Rebbe said it straight-faced, with perfect faith, with incredible conviction, because that's the way it is. So coming from that space, the Rebbe's giving these. They sound like when you read them back from the place of emotional guidance and coaching and therapy, and they sound incredibly wise from that perspective. But I believe what stands out here is that the Rebbe is taking it from, as you said, 3,000 years of Torah and somehow distilling it to be speaking to these questions and issues and idiosyncrasies that have emerged in our, how do we call it, in our troubled generation. Emotional, what was the title of the lecture? Emotional balance in an unbalanced world. Yeah. And so that's really where I think why did I launch that? I'm not sure. But okay, I'll hand it back to you.
No, there's actually a few lines in the letter that I think is what you're trying to get at, that I found very interesting. And it's an English letter in the end notes here somewhere. Give me 1 second to find it in here. As I have often emphasized, all the teaching in our Torah Emes, are true, and they are not just tranquilizers. In other words, we have complete trust in God, not merely because it gives us a good feeling of security, right? A lot of it.
These are the words of the Rebbe.
Yeah, it's English. They're true. They're not just tranquilizers. We have complete trust in God, not merely because it gives us a good feeling of security, but because such trust is justified. Thus, we are assured that God is your keeper, God is your shade at your right hand, and much more in this vein. And I remember reading this in a 1982 letter, and it jumped out at me because this to me personified, I think, what you're getting at. We're not thinking about, oh, what would be the best way to heal someone would be probably to convince them that there's someone to rely on. So let's start telling that to people. No, there's a real faith there. Hashem really runs the world, and Hashem really gave us a soul, and Hashem really empowers us to move ahead, and we really have a role in this world. We're not using that because they're beneficial for health. They are, of course, beneficial for health, but they come from real faith that I don't think secular psychology is able to claim for its own obvious reasons. And that changes the power of health and healing that's able to be provided when you realize that you're not being told these ideas just because they're good to believe, but because they are true and believable. And in essence, that Hashem is trusted, that rather than, oh, it's good to trust in him.
Can I ask?
Is that what you were getting
so.
at a little bit?
So I'd like to know how this. We know that the Rebbe started a campaign, a birthday party campaign in the year his wife passed away on her birthday, 1988, 89, 88. Was it 89 already? And I've heard people say that this is a very important statement for our generation in terms of emotional health and meaning and purpose. Because I have heard from people that I'm not needed for I'm irrelevant. And I think today people seek relevance. How does a person who feels irrelevant, what can I counsel a person who feels irrelevant? Is there any chapter in the book on that?
About relevance? Every line in the book
is about relevance.
Again, what's the question?
I think many people are disillusioned that when they're not needed, I mean, when somebody gets to the age of retirement, we know that Rebbe was very against retirement. When somebody enters an empty nest syndrome and a mother is no longer needed to mother in the same way she mothered. When AI may take away so many jobs and the things that people used to do. I'm not talking if they have a problem to support themselves. That's a different issue. That's a real problem. I'm talking they may be made redundant. And where are they needed? No, there's no question. We all know that there's suicide is a real issue, and I would imagine part of it is because some people think I'm not needed, and actually some people think I'm a burden on my family. I'm a burden on society. Rabbi, don't tell me anything different. I know they would be better off if I wasn't here. I'm not talking about the mental health aspect of that. It may be depression, clinical depression. I'm not going there. I'm talking how to talk a person who's a rational person. Feel free to jump in.
Friend, doc, every morning you go to the hospital. Good morning, doctor. That morning, now he wakes up. Nobody says anything to him. What am I living for?
He asks you, what am I living for? Yeah. Somebody wrote me, one of my community members.
You want to repeat it? People...
Yeah, he's saying that he has a friend who's a doctor who used to every day would check on the patients. People would say, good morning, doctor. Now he's retired. People say, and the doctor questions, what am I living for? I had somebody ask me a real question. He says, I'm older. My wife's older. We used to travel. We can't travel anymore because our finances don't allow it. And we're just living. Why shouldn't I just do what became legal in some places? Why shouldn't I just, put myself to sleep? And it's, obviously I know what I told him, but what would you...
Another way people say that is, in millions of years, the world will be so hot, humanity will end.
So why should we wait millions of years?
Oh, it's pretty sophisticated calculations. So I think the answer to any question depends on the questioner more than the words necessarily to use as the question. So obviously something as existential as why am I here and why should I live? I think a lot depends on what's motivating that question in terms of the response. But I do want to share a story in the book that I think is very deeply connected to this. And it's about a psychologist named Ruth Benjamin, who actually only passed away, a few years ago. She grew up to non-Jewish parents, the Christian parents. In her 20s, she converted to Judaism, and she built a very deep relationship with the Rebbe. She was actually a psychologist in South Africa, and she would discuss sometimes her work and her counseling with the Rebbe. So I'll actually read to you.
This is from an interview.
Yeah, I didn't do this interview, but how to counsel patients who question the value of their lives. She asked the Rebbe. Benjamin recalled, regarding my Jewish patients, as a Jewish psychologist, a lot of her patients were Jewish. He said that I should tell them that following the Holocaust, with so many millions of our people murdered, those alive today have a double duty. They must live not only for themselves, but also for those who are not here. When they realize this, they will find that their own turmoil will be eased. That's a very interesting point of significance that the Rebbe is saying. And I found this in multiple letters, where the Rebbe impresses on people, especially people that are going through emotional pain, that are Jewish, that they're not just alive today. Their life today's significance doesn't just carry its own weight. There's so many young people whose lives were cut short, and whose only ability to continue living and impacting the world is through them, through the people the Rebbe is writing to. And the Rebbe says, therefore, you must live not only for yourself, you must live for them as well. And the Rebbe is saying this not just as a theoretical thing, but as a way that they can overcome their emotional pain and their questioning of what I'm doing in this world, and why should I continue fighting despite the pain. So
How many years does that last? Because we're how many years after the Holocaust?
First of all, there's October 7th happened not too long ago, and there's a lot of young people that I mean, for a young person today, I'm not sure. You're not taken by this. It's fine.
Taken away because I believe
It's okay.
I believe.
You don't talk to me though.
My father has suggested that one of the challenges that the young people today are having is that Judaism has been rebuilt. And you're right, October 7th may have sadly set us back very strongly in that, because the repercussions of that are the anti-Semitism all over the world, where all of a sudden we realize that we cannot take Jewish life for granted. We still need to have that pioneering spirit. But in terms of rebuilding, there's more yeshivas than there was before the war. There's more Jewish life than there was before the war. So while people of my age were still being raised by parents of my parents' age, my father was born in the middle of the war in Australia. So he, at his bar mitzvah, he was being told this message by a visiting rabbi: you have to live for all those children and have a bar mitzvah. It was a very strong responsibility was placed upon him. My father would have put that kind of responsibility on me too, but I don't know if I'm transmitting that same responsibility. And I'm not sure that the Rebbe was hinging it on the Holocaust. So I'm not sure that he was giving practical example to her, the people she was counseling. What was
Absolutely. So first of all, I'll continue reading,
Sure.
but I will just note that the reason why I found it so interesting, because the Rebbe didn't, in contrast to other movements or otherwise, the Rebbe did not always evoke the Holocaust and didn't always say, oh, the motivation why we have to be Jewish is the Holocaust. No, Judaism lives, Judaism's standalone, and we have to keep Torah and mitzvahs because that's what Hashem taught us at Mount Sinai. But when it comes to this, again and again, I see the Rebbe, yes, evoking it, and it's very striking because it's an anomaly. That was just a tangent connected to what you're saying. But here the Rebbe continues, I guess. Regarding my patients who aren't Jewish, the Rebbe said, I must explain to them that they have obligations in this world. All human beings are mandated by the Torah to fulfill the 7 laws of Noah. Then I'll continue reading a little bit, and then I'll stop to unpack that. I'm curious how you think. I cited Mrs. Benjamin is saying, I cited an example of a suicidal patient of mine who was not Jewish, who I managed to get to the hospital in time, saving his life, right? He called me or I found out, I got wind that he was about to take his life, and I saved him, Mrs. Benjamin is saying. And afterwards, he came to me and he said, you're responsible for me being alive. I would have ended it. Now, give me something to live for. It's your fault. I'm alive. I was going to end it. So I had not known how to answer him, and I asked the Rebbe what I should say to a patient like this. Right? It's interesting. It said at that moment of truth, she had nothing to say. The guy said to him, "You saved me, now what? It's your fault. What should I live for?" So the Rebbe responded, he said like this: tell him that he is part of God's world, and that means he has to answer to God. That's it. And I think that goes back to what you're saying, the specifics of life melted or changed, and the need that you felt in particular is not there anymore. To the Rebbe, the very fact, the specifics in a way are insignificant when you think from the bigger picture. Because, so this, that, the very fact that you're here in God's world, that means by definition that you have to answer to God. It's not just about if your life is giving dividends in the way and returns of pleasure and happiness as you would have wanted. There's something bigger here. I mean, you have to answer. There's a responsibility here to your maker at the most baseline level of life. And it is that responsibility and duty that you have, whether it's the people that are not here anymore because of the Holocaust, or whether it's just simply because Hashem put you in this world and you're part of his world and you have to answer to him. So it doesn't really, at that darkest point, it doesn't matter if you feel that it's worth it, because you have to answer to somebody and he has expectations and tasks and obligations for you. And that impels you to move forward and to continue fulfilling that. And I'll actually share something that's loosely connected, not directly connected, but I think it's important. Someone asked me just a week ago if there's anything in the book that I myself struggled with when I was learning the Rebbe's counseling, and if there was something, did I put it into the book? That was the question.
No, so the Rebbe said it that you couldn't relate to you.
Or yeah, that was their question. It was a good question. So I said, first of all, the awe in doing a project, I guess, which possessed me and still does when I was working on this, obviously that fear that your own preferences or the ideas that you somehow resonate with more than others will somehow get more of a voice in the book because your subjectivity. And obviously you try as much as possible to take yourself out of it and allow the ideas as they emerge in the Rebbe's counseling to shine through, knowing that it is much bigger than whatever you understand in the moment, or whatever you don't understand in the moment. So there was one idea that stands out to me as something that I grapple with a lot. I knew it has to go into the book because this is something that's again and again in the Rebbe's counseling. It didn't matter. I understand it. I don't understand it. It has to come through. But it was still something very difficult for me to understand. And that is, you see again and again in the Rebbe's letters to people that are down, that the Rebbe tells them, and sometimes tells them with strength, that there's a mitzvah of Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. There is a command of Hashem, and there's a divine calling, there's a divine command to be happy. And you see this again and again and again. And I always grappled with it. I never understood it. Why does it help to tell someone who's depressed and he's down and he's feeling melancholy? You say, oh, it's actually a mitzvah to be happy. You're not living up to a mitzvah. So like, as if it's not bad enough, like, oh, now you should feel bad that you're feeling that you're down. What does it help? Like, I never understood it. I'm reading it, and the Rebbe is doing this again and again, letter after letter. There's a mitzvah, there's a calling, there's a command, there's a mandate to be happy. But I knew this is something that's there, and it's there. It has to go into the book. I understand. This is a recurring idea. So I'm writing the chapter where it's part of it, and I'm writing it out, and I'm starting to put it in, and obviously delve into it in a more deep way to unpack those letters, to look at them, to really try to understand it. And slowly, as it usually happens, I started seeing a whole new light to this idea that not only what didn't I grapple with it, actually became one of the richest ideas in the book for me, and still is in a certain way. And what I came to understand is that sometimes, specifically when you're in the darkest place and you give up on yourself and the motivation that, oh, get out of this because it'll be good for you. Get out of this because you're ruining your life. Get out of this because it's so bad. It doesn't talk to you anymore. You're done with it doesn't, you won't be motivated by that. It doesn't talk to you. It is specifically that the knowledge, and I know this from myself, I know this from friends, the knowledge that it's not just about you feeling better right now. There's a divine calling, there's meaning, there's value to you working on yourself to recapture your joy, to you working on yourself to get yourself out of the black hole and come back to a happy place. The knowledge that there's a divine calling to that, there's a task, there's a role, and there's also an empowerment, which is something the Rebbe always continues to emphasize, is that the calling comes with an empowerment. It is specifically when you're down that you need something bigger than yourself to tell you it's not just about you feeling better, because sometimes it doesn't work. Actually, a lot of times it doesn't work. You need that simple clarity that what do you mean? There's a mitzvah. Why should you overcome? There's a mitzvah. It's simple. It's a divine calling. It's a divine task to be joyful. It's not just about you feeling better. And it's that gives you the zets and the push that you need, specifically in the darkness. So why was I saying that? Because of what the Rebbe is saying about in the more extreme cases. But I saw this also as an example in the more regular ups and downs. The calling is what the Rebbe resorts back to when people are down. Not just you're going to feel better, it's going to be better. Sometimes the Rebbe says that also.
Yeah, tie it into.
But that was a long answer to your question. But
I tie it into something we just come from Shavuos, something that we all know, that famous medrash. We spoke about it, I think, on Shavuos, that Hashem held the mountain over them like a barrel and said, if you guys receive the Torah, good. If not, boom, the barrel's coming down on you. And we all question, the commentaries question, the Jews already said, voluntarily, we will do, Naaseh v'nishma, we will do, we will receive. Why is Hashem doing this? And the Baal Shem Tov says, it's speaking to the time when the Jew has no motivation. When the Jew's ready to say Naaseh v'nishma, that's fine. But Hashem is saying, in those moments when you can't take responsibility for yourself and you're not interested, you're not motivated, and it's bigger, your mood or your disillusionment or your downness is bigger than you. And it may be, the Rebbe says, Ones Rachmana Patre, it could really be bigger than you. And the Jew really may not find that strength to motivate himself. Hashem has injected something saying, hey guys, I didn't ask you. There's a place where you have to answer to me. And if you don't, and sometimes, and I think we do find that sometimes a person needs to be told, and suicidal people sometimes, get down off that. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it needs to happen. And I'm not talking about how to stop suicide. Sorry, I shouldn't. I didn't mean that in a practical way. That's the thing. But I have discovered that sometimes people want to be told. They cannot be motivated. I've seen it happen. And telling them and taking away that responsibility for them for needing to find their own motivation, and actually showing them that there's things what do you mean? You have responsibilities. Exactly as I was saying. Anyway, I just wanted to share that Baal Shem Tov component there, which, and I'll put it into something personal. I recently had on one of my recent trips to New York, I went to the Rebbe's Ohel. And we all have ups and downs. And I was
my recent trips.
And I was going through, actually I say nothing, but some difficulties. There were some difficulties I was facing, and I was getting a little bit less energetic than usual. I'm thank God blessed to usually be good energy. Hashem should help continue. And I read this letter from the Rebbe in New York, just coming out of the oil. And he speaks to some people who are complaining about the work they have to do in the 1950s in the Israeli educational system. And the Rebbe is saying, throw yourself into the work. Don't think about yourself. They're complaining about their own conditions and their own personal. The Rebbe says, throw yourself into the work. And remember this story. He tells the story of the Alter Rebbe, where the Chassid comes to the Alter Rebbe broken because he lost his money, and he's a pious guy and he wants to marry off his nieces. He committed to paying for their weddings, and now he doesn't have money. He writes this lengthy note. He goes into a private audience with Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, and he faints. When they pull him out, they ask him, why did you faint? He says, because the Rebbe took one look at my note, and he says, everything you're writing here is what you want from him. What you want from him. I don't see you mention what he wants from you. he fainted on the spot because he realized that he was self-centered, not mission-oriented. The Rebbe continues the letter and says, you know what happened? He changed his attitude and he got back his money more than before. That's not the point I ever heard in the story. The Rebbe brings out, he says, you guys, do me a favor, mission-oriented, do what you got to do, everything else will sort itself out. The self-absorption that Rebbe was referring to, their self-absorption was not serving the mission and was not even serving themselves. Plunge yourself, surrender yourself, immerse yourself in the mission. The other things will sort themselves out. And to me, that moment, it was such a wow. And of course it works. I mean, do what you got to do and let the Almighty do what he has to do. It sounds like words, like a fundamentalist words. The Torah says it. The Torah says it. He's in charge of God's in charge of everything. Anyway, there's something that. Any questions from those in the august audience? Yeah.
So at the beginning, you talked that as you started reading the letters, you sort of saw patterns and repeated themes. Were you able to kind of catalog, here's a set of 12 techniques from the Rebbe, or is it more just spread out anecdotes?
Better repeat
I gotta repeat. Yeah, Nachshon was asking that the editor see, after seeing, did you see patterns emerging from the Rebbe's letters where you could kind of catalog that here's 12 techniques in overcoming certain things? It's
still interesting you use the number 12 because 12 chapters, and that's exactly how I would describe this. Is each chapter is meant that this was the catalog of what emerged from those patterns. So yeah, that is what I tried to do with the book. But
Second question, following on something you said, the woman who was counseling the non-Jewish person who was suffering, suggestion was, her obligation for a shot. But suppose somebody who's struggling with that issue themselves, like, is Hashem expect anything from me? Do I have a connection with him if he exists? That won't necessarily speak to them. Is there something else that you have found that works in those cases?
So what you're asking is that if the Rebbe is suggesting to Dr. Ruth Benjamin that if she's counseling non-Jewish patients, tell them they have an obligation to Hashem. But what happens if somebody is struggling with the very existence of Hashem, is not sure whether he believes in it or that doesn't speak to him? What would then be, is there anything else in the Rebbe's writings that would be advice to somebody who that wouldn't apply to? Not wouldn't apply to, doesn't feel that it applies to them.
Which makes it more, this is one thing you've already
so I'm thinking.
I would say there's a correlation, by the way, between Anochi Hashem Elokecha and Lo Tirtzach. And the Seres Adibis, the first of the Ten Commandments, believing in Hashem. The second set of 5, which is if you line them up by each other, you look here. We have Anochi Hashem, I am Hashem, and Lo Tirtzach, do not murder. Belief in Hashem is very, very much up there in do not murder, and do not murder doesn't just apply to somebody else. It would apply to the value and sanctity of life. Sanctity of life, taking away the fact that there's a creator and there's an outside force that gives sanctity to it.
Yeah, but what if someone's in that state? So what are you going to say?
You're at some, but I'm no. So the Rebbe is asking. So what Nachshon is asking is, are there psychological advice here outside?
Get a question. I thought, are you trying to answer, or you're just saying you're explaining the gravity of the question?
Yeah.
Meaning, okay, so the person's struggling with
Yeah.
how does I'll tell you, it's a hard question because another way that the Rebbe differs from, I think, secular psychological methodologies or is that the Rebbe is completely submerged in faith in Hashem. He's a tzaddik, okay? It's not like, he's going to zoom out of that worldview and move into a different worldview. He's not so to speak, an outside viewer on life and methods and thinking things in a cold academic way. He really, really believes in Hashem in every fiber of his being. So he'll never move to a non-believer space of mind. Okay, so that's just he really, really believes in Hashem. He really, really sees it as a reality. It's like if you see something and another person doesn't see it, you're still going to speak of that as a certainty and try to help them overcome their inability to see what you know is real. That said, I want to share something that maybe does apply and could be useful, and that is actually a letter that I didn't know was to someone who was suicidal. I have really, really loved this letter, and I only later found out after the book came out. I got a call from someone who bought those books in an auction, and those letters. Sorry, it's the letters from the 1960s, and he gave me some background to it. It's written to a student at Harvard who inner world started really hurting to the point that he had to admit himself into the mental health institute in Harvard in the 1960s because he was considering to end his life. And from the institute in Harvard in the 1960s, he's writing this very long self-confessional letter to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe has this long correspondence with him. Extraordinary stuff. But in this letter, it's a longer story. Maybe if we had more time, we'd unpack it. But in this letter, the Rebbe writes to him. I'll actually read to you a few lines of it. It's right in the beginning of the book. I loved it so much. A brief reflection will clearly reveal that the universe we live in is ordered in a system of give and take. If you think about plants and trees, right? Everything, we all have needs that need to be met. We all need to take. Trees need water and soil and sunlight. But alongside that, there's also something, every single being in the natural world gives back something. So the trees give oxygen, a bee takes nectar, gives honey. Everything, if you zoom into it, if you think about it, they're taking. They have needs, they need to be nourished. That's the way Hashem, they're nourished by the environment. However, they also have a particular role that they give back. The Rebbe continues, and the personal universe of the individual, the microcosm, must likewise conform to this system of reciprocal relationship. By the very design of the universe, every being is intended to take, but also by its very design to give back. And in other lines, in this letter and other letters, it's an obligation. What do you mean? You're just going to take, you have a debt. You took. You've been brought up, you've been given food, education. You must actually, it behooves you to contribute back and give back. And it is part of the very design of the world. Consequently, when one disrupts or distorts the system by thinking only of their own needs, it must necessarily bring about a distortion in one's immediate surroundings, and especially in one's inner life, because you're not being aligned with the very way every natural being in this world is supposed to be. If you become consumed subconsciously, we never think of ourselves, I'm only a taker right now. But subconsciously, our perspective becomes, we're thinking about how everything is treating us, how life is treating us, how our friends are treating us, our parents are treating us, our family is treating us, our spouse, whatever it is. And you're thinking of it only from that angle. You will necessarily, almost as a law of nature, feel emotional pain because you're moving out of step from the very design of ourselves as creation. The Rebbe continues, I'll actually read the next paragraph, so why not? The Rebbe writes to him with very firm words that you're much too wrapped up with yourself, with your own emotions and feelings and aspirations. You must get away from yourself and begin to think of others. It's time to begin an active participation in society, to give and give generously. The opportunities are many, the need is great. The Rebbe tells him, in the opening of the letter, he says, the answer to your letters in your own letter. Look at all the paragraphs that you wrote, and none of it, when you're thinking about everything about yourself and your life, do you think about what you're doing in your capacity as a giver, in your capacity to give back? You're only thinking about how everyone owes you and how they're not living up to how much you expect them to be giving to you. But did you ever think about, it's similar to the words the Alter Rebbe uses. However, in answer to your question, I think these are type of terms that can resonate with a secular or atheistic person as well, or someone who claims to be atheist. This idea that if you look at nature, the natural world itself screams this, and the idea of debt that we have to give back to the society and the world that has allowed us to live. So that's maybe an idea that I would say to that.
Uh, I would still go back and say, or not go back. I would say that the Rebbe most optimistically saw everybody as a believer.
Yes.
And even this answer, I had once a story, somebody told me, I met a Jew and he said, I don't believe in God. And what do you believe in? Karma. I said, okay, so you call it a different name. I mean, who do you think's holding karma is if you give good to the universe, it gives you good back. Who do you think's holding that account? Like even give and take. If somebody says, I'm not interested in give and take, I just want to be so innately believe in give and take is that there is a system to the universe, that there is a rhyme and reason. But I think that's incredible language that would resonate with. The Rebbe didn't use the word belief here in these letters, which is telling actually, because could be that person was not was that wouldn't have spoken to them.
Happens to be the Rebbe brings up also to him about the gap that the Holocaust left.
Ah, interesting.
And the need to whatever. But it is very interesting.
Actually, that there are cases I know where people lost their interest in life when the person they're taking care of passes away, and now they have no opportunity to give, and they're out of balance.
Exactly. So you're saying that sometimes people lose their interest in life when their giving is curtailed because either their loved one they were taking care of passes on. That's very common. Yeah.
This week was very unbalanced. So went to them. My husband sent me a poster that it would event in the shul. I was at work and I just opened it. It was written emotional balance. I said we gotta go. So and the emotional imbalance started on Friday when we knew that the situation in Israel happened, and we got the message from school that we should take our kids early on, and this always gives me a wave of unbalance. Okay, so and then we see less people coming to the shul on Friday night, and I also live in this building, and we always think what to do to send our kids to the school or not. And then on Tuesday it was bat mitzvah, another event, and this week probably should be planned or not. We did. We went to all of these events and stuff, but it's complicated. Okay, so is there any practical things, guidance, ways, or even I don't know what you need to say to feel better in that moment? Because, for example, you, Rabbi, you have this few Shabbat before. In your Torah, you said, don't say sentence, I'm scared. Remember this? So it helps me, like when I feel that the wave of anxiety is coming, I remember your sentence in my head, not to say that, So, is there something that you like basically can do to feel better?
Yeah, so to repeat the question is in today's day and age, especially in our current situation, there's waves of anxiety and there's instability and there's fears. Jews all over the world are feeling more vulnerable, particularly those who have relatives in Israel are worried about them. Those who are living here are also worried about themselves, and those who are living all over the world. Anti-Semitism is at a rise. We've been told that we have to be careful, to the extent that on Friday when the attack started, we were told the school should close early. And of course, when the security establishment tells you to do something like that, you must listen. And is there any practical tips you've seen from the Rebbe in terms of how to deal with those feelings and how to stay strong and not, quite frankly, go into a place which is unhelpful? It's not helpful to yourself. It's not helpful to the kids. Not helpful to your spouse. Not helpful to your community. Not helpful even to the soldiers that are fighting, and not helpful to anything. But they come, and they seem to be overwhelming us and engulfing us involuntarily, I would say. You just said that I know I shouldn't say I'm scared, and I try not to, but there are scary things going on. What can we? Any practical tips?
I think you have kids in Israel right now. I'd be interested to hear what you what you think and what you do to address that.
I'll be candid. We do have kids, and our kids said we want to stop posting every time we run to the mamad. They run downstairs in the building in the middle of the night with their kids. You see everybody's pajamas. You know, have to think about what you're going to wear at night, because run down into the thing. They jump into the shower. They think, will the air raid siren catch them in the shower? They have to make it as quick as possible. It's ridiculous. Little kids are jet lagged. They're jet lagged now because they wake up in the middle of the night, and then it's 6 o'clock in the morning. They don't want to go back to sleep, and they do. It's so. Our daughter said, I don't want to send you this stuff anymore. I'm making you crazy. I said, please, at least at the very least, let us see what you're feeling, because I can quote what the Rebbe said time and time again. The Rebbe quoting God's words. God's words in the Torah are that Eretz Yisrael is the safest place to be. God's words in the Torah, King David says in Tehillim, Yipol Hashem b'tzidecha, u'revavam yiminecha. May thousands fall from your right side, may 10,000 fall from your 10,000 from your right side. Whatever it is, you have protective angels. A Jew, if he's in the right place, doing what he's meant to do, has nothing to fear. Now, we know that there have been cases, look, 80 years ago, Holocaust. Holocaust is, in Jewish belief, an aberration. A hester panim, something that should not happen again and will not happen again. So we have to leave the Holocaust out of the equation. The world went crazy for 6 years, the entire world. Everybody was complicit in that. But let's leave that out of it. Eretz Yisrael has seen, it doesn't mean nothing can happen. What it means is that everything is more in the direct command of Hashem. Eretz, the land that the eyes of God are upon it, means God's exact hashgacha is even more intense. He's micromanaging even more intensely than anywhere else in the world in Israel. Now, somebody was here tonight, a French person. He said he had a 34-year-old son, 2.5 meters high, big, strapping, never smoked, never drank, pancreatic cancer. It took him in a few months. He just came here tonight, a French couple. In Air India, 282 people died. We don't know exactly what the reason for the crash was. There was somebody that came from Ukraine to Israel for medical treatment. A family died in a missile. There are many, many instances. We all know soldiers that survived Gaza and all that, only to come here on a trip or to come somewhere else, or in Israel to die being run over by a car. You cannot escape. I shouldn't say you cannot escape. What God has stored for each person is destiny, and anything can happen anywhere. We just came now from the hospital, my wife and I. A 31-year-old girl traveling in Kopangan, bitten by a snake that they don't have they don't have an antidote for that venom. It's the one snake in the world. Maybe in Japan there is. And she's struggling now for her life. Hashem, Gaia Bat Ronit. Hashem should protect her. A young man, a 25-year-old man, he came out of the army, everything was okay. He walked on somewhere in Koh Tao, and the roof caved in, boom, fell 5 meters. Thank God, flat on his back. Beautiful believer in God. He knows he's so appreciative that his life is saved. And I can keep on going. You know, when you study life, there are some people that get this, there are some people that get that. You cannot escape whatever it is that. So what we have to understand is that every situation is exactly under God's. Now, it's faith. What I'm saying is pure faith. It's not scientific. It's faith. The Jewish people, deep down, every Jew believes. We know that every Jew believes. It's faith. And ultimately, we all believe in God. Every person sitting here in the audience says Shema Yisrael 3 times a day. Hashem Echad means Hashem is one and is in full charge of anything. Eretz Yisrael, everyone has hashgacha, and us, if we're told by the security not to come to shul, we won't come to shul. Because that would mean that we're being dangerous. We're doing something, we're not supposed to do something dangerous. But living in Eretz Yisrael right now is not dangerous. You have to follow not to go into your secure room is dangerous. You have to follow orders. You have to follow things. To evacuate Israel now is not on the agenda.
There was someone who was saying that the British consulate had informed British Jews, right? Or the British that are in Israel, to make their way through the desert for 5 hours to Egypt.
Right. I want to just finish off. What I just said was theology, philosophy. I want to finish off with, just hang on one second. I want to finish off with practical. And this is the most important thing we have to know. There's this little 2 inches between our ears that is going to be in charge of everything we feel, hear, our anxieties, our pleasures, our ability to cope is all in our brains. That brain can either focus on the fear or it can move itself away to something practical. Watching news, hearing updates 24 hours a day is guaranteed to cause you severe anxiety. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you. It causes a severe case of anxiety. I don't say put away your phone and never check the news. I don't think so. We all have loved ones there. We're all interested. We want to know what's going on. But the obsession creates an obsession and a dysfunction and a paranoia and an anxiety, and for some, the inability to cope. So we do have a choice. We have a choice to think positive, to be responsible, to trust in Hashem, and most important, to Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, try and create joy in our lives. Distract ourselves not by taking drugs from the situation, but by doing meaningful things and so on. So I think this is at least for me the way I cope, and I think that's the way the Torah tells us to cope, and I think it's eminently possible. And another thing I wanted to add about serving Hashem with joy, what's so uplifting to me, transformational about the Rebbe telling people that it's a mitzvah, is because you wouldn't believe how many Jews think it's a mitzvah to be anxious. They grew up that way. They grew up with parents that it was back in the olden generations.
Anxious and self-critical.
Anxious, self-critical, the oy syndrome, when guilt. But there's an oy that we think somehow, and we're almost scared to tell somebody else, snap out of it. He says, how can I snap out of it? You know what's going on in Israel now? Well, you're going to tell them, I know what's going on in Israel, but that's not helping them. So it's hard to tell somebody else, but you have to tell yourself, snap out of it. Try, and you want to do something for Israel? Do another mitzvah and be joyous. It's a mitzvah to be joyous. If I can manage to be joyous, I'm only sending positive energy up to heaven, which beams back down on Israel. When you know it's a mitzvah, besides the fact that it gives you the power, it at least when you fall into that depressive state, for those of us that want to be doing mitzvahs, we know that that's not a mitzvah. That's you can say, right now, sometimes we scratch ourselves. It's very, we enjoy scratching ourselves. Getting into that frame of mind of anxiety is like, it's self-indulgent. It feels good a little bit, but I can't be happy now. Anyway, so I hope we helped a little bit of a response.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I want to add one. No, I want to add one small thing to that. That was extraordinary. So about a practical. I think you're asked practical. Just one soundbite is that you see the Rebbe advising a lot of people. I actually didn't know this until I studied the Rebbe's letters, to study chapter 23 of Psalms of Tehillim, Paragraph Gimel, and to repeat it to yourself in your head. It doesn't have to be word for word, but the ideas of the psukim, and it could be word for word also. I mean, it's not so hard to learn it by heart. And just Hashem roi lo achsar b'nodesh achto v'chasir yirfuni kol yemei chayai gam ke'elech b'geit salmavet lo yirara.
Popularly known as Psalm 23.
Psalm 23.
God is at my side, and I have nothing to fear.
And to study it well, to know it, to know it by heart, and to use it often when necessary. So that if you're looking for something like very tangible, that would be something I would say from the Rebbe's letters.
Very powerful, and I think also the Rebbe would often send to Gates of Trust. Shara B'Tochen.
Yes.
There's a gorgeous website, gatesoftrust.org. It's in various languages. Gates of Trust. You have it in the book.
Yeah, no. So the Rebbe recommends Gates of Trust. I don't have the website.
The website has many lectures and many. It's beautiful, and it actually helps strengthen the trust in Hashem, and the ability to think positively and think that what gatesoftrust.org. No, Gates of Trust is Shara Bitachon from Rabbeinu Bechaya, but it's the full website dedicated, the best authors, the best speakers of all different shiurim and a plethora of materials. Gates of Trust, I think it's gatesoftrust.org. Phenomenal resource. And the more you, for me personally, it's a daily study for me. Daily, for a few years, I studied Gates of Trust, and it's just, it really gives you the right to surrender to God. It's not a cop-out. Hashem invites it, says, rely on me. Doesn't take away the need for us to do, Hashem wants us to do what we can, but I think in a few minutes we're gonna.
Yeah, I'll just read. I'll end with this, with the words that the Rebbe wrote about chapter 23. Just because it's the Rebbe's words. What the chap? Yeah, but in 1968, a woman wrote to the Rebbe that she was extremely anxious about other people and what they might be saying about her. In addition to advising her to take anti-anxiety pills if recommended by a professional, the Rebbe suggested, study chapter 23 of Psalms until you are well versed in its content. So you know well its content. And then in parentheses, not necessarily the exact words. You don't necessarily need to know verbatim. And it also does not matter which language you study it. If English is easier for you, that's fine. In the future, I think then the Rebbe writes, and you should think it over in your head often. In the future, pay no attention at all if somebody speaks about you. Don't even ask them about it. I guess she used to ask people if they spoke about her. For, as stated in the chapter, God is with you, and only goodness and kindness will follow you. Consequently, no one at all can, heaven forbid, have power over you. Shakaya, thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. I think we're going to join here. Thank you, Levi. All the best. Thank you, all our Zoomers, for joining.